What
So when we started
archaeologists just
excavating
discovered
here,
about
we
the
found
Pictish
that there
capital
were
is
a
sending
series of
shock waves
enclosures,
through
and all of
history.
that was enclosing
And even
several
Joe
buildings,
Rogan is
probably
talking about it.
hall-type
The
buildings.
Gilling Sword, hidden in the misty hills of Scotland, marks the re-emergence of a forgotten kingdom after more than 1,000 years. This isn't just about a few stones or relics, but an entire city in the clouds, with roads, hearths, imported luxury goods, and possibly even the seat of ancient rulers. Rogan called it an insane discovery, and he's not wrong. This isn't just a footnote in history, it's a game changer. And once you see the evidence, you'll never look at Scotland the same way again. The lost people of the north. For centuries, the Picts were more shadow than substance, more myth than memory. They haunted the edges of Roman maps, described as painted warriors who vanished into forests and fog. What we knew of them came mostly through fragments, odd stone carvings, a scattering of ruins, vague mentions in early chronicles. They had no written language of their own, at least not one we've ever deciphered. And yet, at their height, they controlled vast territories across what is now northern and eastern Scotland. They fought back Rome, influenced early Christianity, and laid the groundwork for the kingdom that would eventually become Scotland. But then they disappeared. By the 9th century, the word Pict began to fade from records. Historians long assumed they were either absorbed by the Scots or wiped out by Vikings. Their name lingered, but their presence all but dissolved. The absence of cities or obvious royal centers only deepened the mystery. Unlike the Saxons or the Gauls, the Picts left no grand ruins, no palaces, no libraries, just cryptic symbols etched into standing stones, some depicting animals, others weapons, and some too abstract to decode. For decades, archaeology offered little help. Most hill forts were modest, often assumed to be temporary strongholds for scattered clans. There was little evidence to suggest any central government or true capital. The Picts, it seemed, were destined to remain an enigma. Even the best minds in medieval studies treated them like a side chapter to Scotland's story, not a full volume of their own. That started to change in the early 2000s when excavations around Aberdeen began turning up clues. In the tiny village of Rhynie, archaeologists found a strange standing stone with a carved bearded man holding an axe, dubbed the Rhynie Man. The stone was clearly Pictish, but it wasn't alone. Around it, they uncovered fragments of high-status buildings, glassware from France, and even Roman aerae once used to store wine. Someone important had lived here, someone with connections far beyond the highlands. Still, a village is not a capital. It wasn't until attention turned uphill toward a towering formation called Tapanoth that the story took a dramatic turn. Rising over 500 meters above sea level, this imposing hill had long been home to the ruins of an ancient fort. It was remote, windswept, and largely forgotten until 2020. That year, a team from the University of Aberdeen conducted a detailed drone and LAR survey of the summit and its surrounding slopes. What they saw shocked them. Dozens and hundreds of circular depressions in the earth, platforms layered with time, stretched out like a ghost map of a long-lost town. As they counted, the number grew, more than 800 hut platforms, clustered and organized, a population estimate of several thousand. Radiocarbon dating placed the occupation in the 5th and 6th centuries, the Pictish Age. This wasn't just a fort. This was something else entirely. And the implications were enormous. If Tapanoth held thousands of people, if it operated with its own social structure, agricultural systems, and elite, ask ChatGPT, residences, then everything we thought we knew about the Picts had to be re-examined. The idea that they were a loose network of war bands didn't hold. Something more organized had been here, something hidden for centuries right on top of the hill. The discoveries at Tapanoth sent shock waves through the academic world, but the public barely noticed. That would change in the years that followed, especially after researchers returned in 2024 and 2025 with fresh excavations, new findings, and one conclusion that no one expected. The Picts may not have vanished. They may have been building something all along, something far bigger, something that would leave everyone speechless. Echoes from the hill, Tapanoth revisited. Tapanoth doesn't look like much from a distance. It's a steep, rocky hill that juts out from the surrounding countryside near Rhynie, blanketed in heather and wind. Sheep graze at its base. Locals have passed by for generations, calling a fort maybe a lookout. Some even believe the stones at the summit were just remnants of a prehistoric structure long abandoned. But in 2020, that quiet hill became the center of one of the most extraordinary archaeological revelations in Scottish history. The drone surveys were the first step. Using LAR, a laser-based imaging technology that scans the ground even through thick vegetation, researchers mapped the upper slopes in detail never seen before. What appeared were outlines, not random or isolated, but patterned and dense. Excavation teams climbed the hill and dug into the soil, confirming what they had seen from above. There were platforms, carefully leveled areas where round houses once stood. Not a handful, not a couple dozen, but over 800. That number changed everything. This was no temporary shelter, no emergency refuge for a local tribe. This was a city on a hill. The estimated population ranged from 3,000 to 4,000 people, placing alongside some of the largest known early medieval settlements in all of Europe, and yet was completely undocumented. Not a single surviving Pictish source named it. The Romans never mapped it. The Irish annals made no mention. It had existed in silence for over a millennium, waiting to be seen. Radiocarbon dating of the charred remains and hearths point to the 5th and 6th centuries. This was the heart of the Pictish era, a time when they were supposedly decentralized and fragmented. But here was evidence of a permanent community, with structure, with roads and layers of occupation, and signs of elite presence. Excavations revealed more than domestic life. There were metalwork areas, imported pottery fragments, animal bones from organized butchering, and even early signs of social stratification based on the size and placement of the houses. The hilltop itself showed signs of having once been a fortified upper enclosure. The stone ramparts had been vitrified, burned at incredibly high temperatures until they fused together. Whether this was from ritual destruction, an invading force, or something else entirely is still debated. But what's clear is that this wasn't just a defensive structure. It was symbolic. Whoever controlled the top of Tappanah wasn't just living there. They were ruling from it. And just below, the valley held more secrets. Rhynie, once thought to be a minor village, revealed signs of wealth and foreign trade. The remains of Amphor hinted at contact with the Roman world even after the empire's retreat. Fragments of elaborate glass and ornate brooches pointed to people of status. The discovery of the Rhynie man, a towering carved stone of a bearded warrior holding an axe, further fueled speculation. This wasn't an isolated fort and settlement. It was a network, a power base. The University of Aberdeen returned to the site in 2021 and again in 2022, and the work hasn't stopped. Each excavation season peels back another layer, sometimes literally. In 2024, the focus shifted to the house platforms themselves. Multiple hearths, built one atop another, show continuous use across generations. Evidence of cereal grains, possibly stored communally, pointed to food systems more complex than any previously documented in Pictish archaeology. Even the soil revealed clues, with elevated phosphate levels suggesting animal pens or waste zones nearby. There's a sense now that Tappanah wasn't just a forgotten stronghold. It was one of the major nodes in a royal network, maybe even a capital. But if that's true, why was it abandoned? Why was it never written about? And what happened up there that left only ruins behind? The answers, it turns out, are beginning to surface. And what archaeologists just discovered about the Pictish capital is about to change everything we thought we knew. Rhynie and the warrior kings. If Tappanah was a crown, then Rhynie may have been the jewel embedded in it, only a mile or so down from the hill summit. The land flattens out into what seems like just another patch of rural Aberdeen. But beneath the fields lies something extraordinary. In recent years, archaeologists have begun to understand that Rhynie wasn't just a village near a fort. It may have been a ceremonial and political center in its own right, possibly even the seat of Pictish kings. The story of Rhynie's importance began quietly, with a few strange finds in the 1970s, including several Pictish symbol stones. But it wasn't until modern excavations began in the 2010s that the true scale of the site became clear. Teams unearthed fragments of Mediterranean pottery, bronze brooches, drinking horns, and evidence of complex metalwork. These weren't everyday items. These were elite goods, the kind of artifacts you'd expect to find at royal courts or early medieval monasteries, not in a remote Scottish field. One artifact stood out above the rest. It was a carved standing stone, now famously known as a Rhynie man standing over 6 feet tall. The stone depicts a bearded warrior holding what appears to be a ceremonial axe. The carving is deeply stylized, with an exaggerated expression and strong lines. No one knows exactly who he was meant to represent. A king, a god, a warrior priest? Theories abound, but one thing is certain. This wasn't a casual decoration. It was a statement, a symbol of power. What's even more interesting is where the stone was found. It wasn't placed randomly. It stood near a large timber hall, over 20 meters long, built in a style that closely mirrors elite structures in early medieval Ireland. That hall may have served as a royal residence, or perhaps a feasting hall where alliances were formed and maintained. Nearby, other structures appear to have been used for ritual or ceremonial purposes. This wasn't just a settlement. It was a royal complex. That discovery forced historians to reevaluate the nature of Pictish kingship. For years, the assumption had been that the Picts operated as small, scattered tribes with occasional overkings. But Rhynie suggests something more centralized, more structured. There was governance here, perhaps even bureaucracy. The presence of imported goods shows a far-reaching network of connections, one that extended into the post-Roman world of continental Europe. Archaeologists also found evidence of feasting and animal sacrifice. Burned cattle bones, separated by age and cut patterns, pointed to organized communal meals, possibly events tied to ritual or governance. The distribution of artifacts across the site suggests clear zones of activity: residential, industrial, ceremonial. There was planning here, not improvisation. The close proximity of Tapanoff adds another layer to the story. It's hard to believe that 2 major sites, one fortified and massive, the other filled with elite goods and religious symbols, existed side by side without being part of a larger system. Some researchers now believe that Rhynie served as a seasonal royal seat or religious center, while Tapanoff may have been the administrative or defensive stronghold. Together, they may represent the best candidate we've ever had for a Pictish capital, and that theory is gaining ground. In late 2023, the University of Aberdeen published a comprehensive volume summarizing over a decade of work titled Picts, Scourge of Rome, Rulers of the North. In it, scholars argued that the Rhynie-Tapanoff complex is the strongest archaeological case for an early medieval urban zone in Scotland, a proto-capital, a forgotten kingdom in the mist. So where does this leave us? With more questions and answers, perhaps, but the momentum is building, because in 2024 and 2025, researchers returned to both sites again, and what they uncovered this time didn't just support the theory, it transformed it. And what archaeologists just discovered about the Pictish capital will leave you speechless. Recent discovery. For years, the discoveries at Tapanoff and Rhynie were compelling on their own. But in 2024, in early 2025, archaeologists returned with new questions and better tools. This time, their mission wasn't just to map the settlement or verify old assumptions. They want to dig deeper, literally and figuratively, into how this place functioned and who exactly lived there. What they found has stunned even the most seasoned experts. And what archaeologists just discovered about the Pictish capital will leave you speechless. The first major breakthrough came in the summer of 2024 during a focused excavation on the upper slopes of Tapanoff. Researchers reopened several of the previously identified house platforms and began digging into the deeper floor layers. Beneath one structure, they uncovered evidence of multiple hearths stacked over time, with each level representing a different generation. What was remarkable wasn't just the continuity of occupation, but the sophistication. Embedded in one of the hearth layers was a shard of imported Roman pottery not previously cataloged. Another fragment bore faint incised lines, possibly marks of measurement or early symbolic writing. If confirmed, it could be the closest the Picts have ever come to leaving a written trace. But that wasn't the only find. In the same excavation zone, a small team uncovered a pit structure filled with charred cereal grains, animal bones, and a large flat stone slab, slightly scorched and intentionally placed. Analysis of the grains revealed they had been processed in bulk, more than any single family could reasonably use. This was industrial-scale food preparation, hinting at communal storage or even taxation. If Tapanoff had a system for managing food distribution, it suggests not just survival, but governance. Meanwhile, a separate team was working in the valley near Rhynie. They located a buried structure adjacent to the feasting hall, partially visible on older scans but never fully investigated. What they found was a small annex, likely ceremonial, where dozens of broken weapons and tools had been deliberately buried. Some of the items were iron blades, bent or shattered before being placed into the earth. This kind of weapon burial wasn't random. It mirrored rituals seen in Scandinavia and early Ireland, where high-status items were retired after use in battle or ceremony. In other words, the people who lived here weren't just powerful. They had rituals, belief systems, and possibly even a warrior class. As these findings were published and shared across academic circles, the story caught the attention of unexpected voices. In one of the episodes of his JRE podcast, Joe Rogan discussed the new Tapanoff findings with a guest historian, and his reaction was, in his own words, unreal. Dude, Rogan said, this is an insane discovery. You're telling me there was this massive organized city on a hill in freaking Scotland 1,000 years ago, and we didn't know about it until now? That's wild. They had roads, trade, even their own rituals, and nobody talked about them. If this was in Rome or Egypt, it'd be in every textbook. Ask ChatGPT. He wasn't wrong. What archaeologists had just discovered was that Tapanoff and Rhynie together formed something more complex than a fortress or village. They formed a capital, not in the modern sense of walls and flags, but in the ancient sense, a heart of power, ritual, defense, and kingship, a place where decisions were made, alliances were sealed, and power was displayed for all to see. And yet, for over 1,000 years, it sat forgotten beneath the grass, misjudged as just another ruined fort. The silence surrounding it wasn't just historical neglect. It was a lost chapter, now reopened, now undeniable, and now impossible to ignore. A kingdom in the mist. The discoveries at Tapanoff and Rhynie are not just rewriting the story of the Picts. They are dismantling an entire narrative that painted them as disorganized, tribal, and culturally isolated. What's now emerging from the soil of northeastern Scotland looks nothing like the picture drawn in dusty history books. Instead, it resembles a structured society with tiers of power, a working economy, and a symbolic landscape rooted in ritual and kingship. And that leads to a much bigger question. If this really was a Pictish capital, why was it forgotten? Part of the answer may lie in what Tapanoff was never meant to be. It wasn't a stone-walled Roman-style city with carved inscriptions or monumental architecture. It was a capital built in timber, turf, and stone, shaped by native design, not imported tradition. Its power was expressed not through marble temples, but through strategic height, regional control, and sacred geography. The entire area was engineered to be seen. From the summit fort to the symbol stone standing in the valley below, everything pointed to authority. But when the people left, the materials didn't last. The wood rotted. The turf collapsed. Only the stones remained. Another possibility is the political transformation that swept across Scotland in the 9th century. As Viking raids intensified and Gaelic influence expanded from the west, the old centers of power began to collapse or merge. The Picts may not have been conquered in a single battle, but instead absorbed over time. Their customs, their leadership, even their language gradually folded into a new political entity, the Kingdom of Alba. As this kingdom grew, it created its own narrative, one that prioritized Gaelic ancestry, Christian kingship, and unity. The Picts became a whisper, and tapping out a shadow on the landscape. But now, with the evidence in hand, that shadow has taken form. Scholars are revisiting older assumptions with fresh eyes. The scale of occupation, the complexity of planning, and the wealth of materials found all suggest Tapanoff was not an outlier, but a center. And if it was a center, that changes everything. It repositions the Picts as not just a fierce people who painted their bodies and raided Roman walls, but as builders, organizers, and rulers of a highland realm we've barely begun to understand. And there's more to come. The 2025 excavation season was already being planned before the winter had even ended. Geophysics teams are scanning new areas on the lower slopes. Soil samples from the hearths are undergoing isotope testing to trace food sources and trade networks. One early test showed traces of non-local grains, potentially imported or at least exchanged through complex trade. If that is confirmed, it would be one of the first archaeological links tying Pictish highland settlements to broader regional economies. There's also renewed interest in oral traditions, especially Gaelic and Scots legends, that might preserve distant echoes of these lost centers. Some old tales speak of the Hill of Kings, where warriors came to swear oaths before battle. Others mention a place where the stones speak only to those born under a certain moon. For years, these are dismissed as poetic nonsense. Now, researchers are listening more closely. If this is indeed the Pictish capital, then it was not erased. It was simply buried under centuries of misunderstanding, only now being pulled into focus. And as more layers are peeled back, we are reminded that history is never truly settled. It waits in the cracks of stone, in the warmth of ancient hearths, in the mist that still clings to tap each morning. The kingdom was always there. We just stopped looking for it. What comes next for the Pictish legacy? The hill still stands. Tapanoff, battered by wind and time, remains as it always has, silent, immovable, watching. But now, for the first time in over 1,000 years, the world is watching back. The discoveries made in the last few years have reawakened global interest in the Picts, not as a mystery, but as a culture capable of complexity, order, and influence. And this is only the beginning. Plans are already in motion. The University of Aberdeen has announced a new phase of research, one that will involve not just archaeologists, but linguists, botanists, and climate historians. The aim is to build a full reconstruction of life at Tapanoff. How people lived, how they moved through the landscape, what they ate, what they believed. Digital models are being developed to bring the site to life in classrooms and museums. Visitors may one day walk through a virtual version of the Pictish capital, with every house, path, and symbol reconstructed based on real data. The impact is also political in its own way. Local communities around Rhynie have started heritage initiatives to preserve the site, promote tourism, and share the story. What was once considered a footnote in Scottish history is becoming a headline, a point of pride for young Scots. The Picts are no longer just symbols on stones. They are builders of towns, makers of laws, and maybe even founders of the nation itself. There are still unanswered questions. Why did Tapanoff fall silent? Was it abandoned gradually, or did something force it end? What happened to people who lived there, those who carved stones and tended fires at the hill's peak? We may never know everything, but we now know more than ever before. And perhaps that's the point. The Picts were never truly lost. They were just waiting to be found again. From the misty ridges of Aberdeen to podcasts and research labs across the world, their story is rising. And what archaeologists just discovered about the Pictish capital didn't just leave us speechless. It left us wanting more. If thousands of people once lived on that forgotten hilltop, governed by rituals and rulers we never even named, what other ancient cities might be hiding in plain sight, still buried beneath our feet? And how close are we to uncovering the next one?